This is Real Estate Real Talk, a weekly podcast about real estate industry news that actually matters, hosted by some of the industry's leading agents. Here are this week's hosts.
Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Real Talk podcast. In Season 4, we're interviewing industry leaders, and today we have Pat Zaby with us. Welcome, Pat.
I'm Pat Zaby. I am a CRS, a CCIM, several other designations, but I have been involved with RRC since it began in 1976. So I'm an instructor for RRC. I've been doing that since the early 1980s.
Great, Pat. I'm so glad you're able to be with us today. So what made you want to become an instructor?
Well, it was sort of accidental, which is sort of the way I got into the software business also. I had a brokerage company, and so I was teaching my salespeople. I started teaching at the board office, and the next thing you know, it just grew from there. Well, the interesting thing about it is when you teach, you have to be better than you normally are, and you want to do a better job and everything else. And so the teaching helped me be a better salesperson. Being a good salesperson helped me to be a better teacher. And so as a result, they fed on each other. It just happened that I became very popular, and I was making much more money speaking than in the real estate business in the day-to-day trenches. And then actually it happened in 1990, but it started in the late 80s. We were partnering with another company in a software product, and it was supposed to debut at the NAR convention, and they ran into trouble. And so we had to finish the product ourselves, and so that's how we got into the software business, which turned around and led to something else altogether. But I have been a realtor since 1968.
What are some of the topics you specialize in teaching as an instructor?
I guess the first ones that I taught were the CRS 204, which was our investment class, using single-family homes for investment purposes. And that's been popular since about 1981 or 82. Today, it's still a very popular course. It's because it's a natural progression to go from selling houses to selling these houses that people understand as an investment, but to turn around and use it as a rental property. I also did taxation and financing. And then I started doing marketing classes, the listing and the selling, and then I've ended up doing the technology part of the courses. So I've taught the entire gambit of our CRS courses.
So, Pat, you contributed to one of the articles that can be found on our website, Empowering Your Clients Beyond Today, and you emphasized helping clients think beyond the immediate transaction. So what inspired you to adopt that long-term educational approach to your real estate career?
Well, today's clients especially expect more than just a transaction. They want guidance that helps them make smart decisions now and for years to come. The market is changing fast, and empowering clients means giving them the confidence to navigate those changes long after the sale. Now, if you look at agents right now, these are some statistics that just came out of the latest profile of buyers and sellers that was released at the NAR convention just a couple of weeks ago. 86% of agents' business comes from their sphere of influence, and these people say that they'll do business with the agent again and refer people to them. In fact, in the study, it says that 90% of both buyers and sellers said they were satisfied with the service they got. The problem comes in, and this is really a shocking part, is that only 13% of those surveyed actually do business with the agents again. And the problem is simple. The agents are not staying in touch with them. More than 90% of the people in your sphere of influence are not thinking about buying or selling right now. And if you talk about buying and selling all the time on your social media, in your newsletters, and other ways of conversation, you'll alienate the majority of your people. Your communications have to transcend buying and selling. You've got to talk about something that will appeal to everyone. And the relevant choice is home ownership instead of, years ago, we knew this ability to continue to keep the conversation going between an agent and the homeowner was important. And people would say, well, what are you going to teach these people? What are you going to talk to them about? Well, some people were saying, I'm going to send recipe cards to them. And It was a nice thought, but if you remember when you learned Pavlov's law, where he rang a bell every time he fed his dog, pretty soon he could just ring the bell and the dog would start salivating. Well, the problem with recipe cards is they're not relevant to the real estate agent. And so you must talk about things that are important. And the thing that is relevant is homeownership. We've got to teach these people to be better homeowners. Now, it goes a little bit further than that because, right now we've got 1.6 million realtors in the United States. Our current volume is down by probably 1 million homes a year in sales, but with the current number of sales, 4 million sales, and there's a listing side and a selling side to that, then that's 8.2 million transaction sides. Well, that gives the average agent 5 transactions a year. Well, that certainly is not enough for a professional income. If we established 30 transactions, that would be a reasonable number, a benchmark, we would only need 273,000 agents. So we have 6 times more than we actually need. One of the really shocking things is that 50% of the agents in the National Association of Realtors don't sell a single home in a year. So we've got to be better at it. We've got to be more professional. And it's not just a job that says, oh my goodness, I love houses and I love people, so I guess I should be a realtor. Or if they can't get a real job somewhere, then they decide to sell real estate. Well, that's just not the way it is. Real estate is a real job. And the public expects us to not only be educated, they expect us to be good at what we do. And so we need to engage with people and get them to do business with us. That's the number one most important thing to get business. Whenever somebody comes to me and they say, Pat, I'm thinking about going into the real estate business. And I go through some of the stuff that I just asked you. Why are you considering doing that and all that? Well, I've got a degree in real estate because a lot of universities offer degrees in real estate nowadays, but that's not necessarily going to get them success. What they need to be able to do is to engage with people and get them to do business with them. So while you're teaching them to be a better homeowner, you're showing them that you know what you're doing and you're different from all the other agents. And I really believe the agent's mantra needs to be helping people be better homeowners when they buy, sell, and all the years in between, because that will transcend that period of home ownership.
Absolutely. You bring up a great point of not only working with that client once, but having those touch points after you close that transaction. Which resources do you believe makes the biggest difference in helping your clients understand that long-term value of home ownership?
Well, before I get you to that one point, I still think that we're not doing as good a job as agents explaining things to buyers and sellers and in the bigger picture, homeowners. This all happened back in the 90s. Brokers took a different position. In the 90s, you could breathe, you could qualify for a loan. And so brokers just wanted agents to go out there, not worry about qualifying a buyer or anything else. And so all they did would find a buyer, drive them around the car till they buy or they die, whichever comes first. And then that was just about it. Well, the problem with that is they didn't understand financing. They didn't understand the tax benefits. And the brokers actually taught them that, you know what, you're not supposed to practice law, so just tell them to go see a lawyer. Well, they are supposed to know what's legal and not legal, and they need to point their customer to a lawyer if something comes up like that. They say, send them to a mortgage banker to teach them all the things about mortgages. Well, you know what? There's sometimes a disconnect between that person, and there's a lot of different types of loans that are out there, and most mortgage bankers, they specialize in one type of mortgage. And so what I'm saying is we need to make them feel comfortable that we're the source of their real estate information. And so if we give them this empowerment, if we give them the clarity and confidence to make good decisions that support long-term financial well-being, not just in their next move, they will stay with us. We will earn that ability to be the source of real estate information. You see, homeowners have an average net worth currently in the United States of $430,000. Renters, by comparison, only have a net worth of $10,000. Now, homeownership builds equity over time because of two things: amortization of the mortgage and the appreciation on the home. And the problem is renters don't have that because while their rent could be less than what a payment would be, but in many cases not, they're not investing that money somewhere else, and so they don't build that equity. Now, I just recently saw something that said there's over $17 trillion in equity, according to Cotality. The average homeowner's got $307,000 in equity, even though some of the prices in some areas have come down recently, which means 46% of mortgaged residential property are equity rich, means they own no more than half of their home's value. Well, here's the part about where I started talking about investment property. If you build the confidence with a person, you sold them a house by convincing them it was a good buy for them, and then over a few years, they actually make money on it and they see how much their equity has grown in the home, even though they haven't sold it. It's not a stretch to tell them that, you know what? You can make the same kind of money by buying a single family home in predominantly owner-occupied neighborhoods and renting it out. Talk about that whole process, which is single family homes afford a person to borrow large sums of money at fixed interest rates for long terms on appreciating assets with tax advantages and reasonable control. Now, contrast that with the volatility of the stock market right now, and you go, wow, houses are something that I understand, and maybe I should be investing there. This empowerment starts with education. I really believe that it's our job to teach them to be better homeowners, and that gives us this ability, not only when they're buying the house or when they're selling it, but all the time in between. In today's market, we've got higher rates, affordability concerns, constant headlines, and buyers feel overwhelmed. We can cut through all that noise. When clients understand the mechanics behind the appreciation, the amortization, the tax benefits, the equity growth, timing strategies, then they stop reacting emotionally and they start reacting strategically. A very different approach than most people. Most people, agents included, they even approach their prospecting this way. They want to find a sale right now instead of building relationships. And it's the relationships that allow a person to earn an above average income. So education positions the agent as the expert, not just a salesperson. And when clients feel informed, they feel empowered, and they credit you with that confidence. I believe teaching builds credibility and keeps you relevant in front of them.
As agents, everyone wants to be that source of information for their clients. And for an agent who maybe is just starting out, what advice would you give them to become that knowledge expert? It's one thing to inform your agents, but how about increasing your own knowledge on the industry?
Well, they really have to understand that getting their license, and even though they may have had to take a lot of courses along the way, that's the beginning. That's not the end. School is never out for the pro, and they need to continue on. In fact, my normal progression through my career was I have a degree in real estate. At the time, there was only 6 universities in the country that gave degrees in real estate. And while it was good and it was important, but I realized there's more that's needed. My mother, who was in real estate, used to say, Pat, there's 2 ways to learn things in this world. One is through personal experience, but the tuition is way too expensive. You can't learn everything that way. And the other way to learn is through someone else's experience. Now, the tuition is less expensive that way. And so education becomes that experience. Now, my mother used to say, Pat, everybody in the world wants to give you advice. And there's all sorts of people out there that instead of selling real estate, they're teaching how to sell real estate. And there's an old expression that goes, those who can do and those who can't teach. Well, you've got to decide who knows what they're talking about. When I got involved with what it was called CRS back then, and we had a name change to calling it RRC now, I found out these were the best of the best in all the country that were teaching these courses. And it was much faster to go back after you went to one of these courses, implement the material that you learned, and move forward from there. And it's something that you have to continue on and on. And after you've taken all the courses, then maybe you start a masterminds group or join a masterminds group of people that are selling the same type of real estate that you do, and you can help each other and you don't feel threatened by the people in your own market area.
I think that's a very important lesson that you don't rise in this industry alone, and it's okay to lean on others for education, networking, in order to succeed. Going back to the previous question on tools, are there any other systems that you have in place or resources that you use to keep clients in the know?
Okay, well, for the same reason I told you a minute ago that like 86% of an agent's business comes from their sphere of influence, they've got to have a database. But I'm going to put that on the side for just a second. And I want to tell you why we moved to a different area. We had a contact manager, and everybody should have some form of database. Now, the buzzword nowadays is CRM, a customer relationship manager. But it has its own inherent problems because it's too complicated for the most part. I now believe that either Outlook or Google Contacts is just about the only thing that a person needs because it will sync with your telephone because you never go anywhere without your telephone. It has your calendar on there. It's got all your contacts. You can make notes. You can send documents, and it's the way to go. So what we found out was these CRMs or contact managers had marketing programs in there, and these were campaigns, but the agent had to apply them. Well, since the vast majority of people are just a one-person operation, they don't have an assistant, even a part-time assistant. Sometimes they don't even have a virtual assistant. And so as a result, they try to do everything themselves. We tend to go wherever the crisis is at the moment, which would be putting out the fire instead of doing fire prevention.
So the real estate industry is changing so quickly. What are some outdated real estate habits that you believe agents need to let go of in order to truly empower themselves and their clients?
Well, I think one of the biggest myths is about unrealistic expectations. Agents want a silver bullet. They want something that's going to cure their problems right away instead of putting in the work and the time and the effort to do it. Expecting immediate sales from your posts is like planting a seed and walking away when it doesn't sprout overnight, like Jack and the Beanstalk. Social media works best when you understand what it's really designed to do. Nurture relationships over time, maintain top-of-mind awareness, turning strangers into acquaintances, acquaintances into followers, followers into clients, and advocates, once they become an advocate, that's where the referrals come from. It's not a shortcut to sales. It's a system for staying visible, credible, and trustworthy long enough for people to remember when they're ready to make a move. When they think that they're going to move, your name's got to be the first one that pops into their mind. That's what's important. I think today's agent mentality is one and done, especially if they are also not making a above average income. If they're trying to pay their bills, then they got to run out there and try to sell a house. And then when they realize the person's not going to move for a long time and they need another sale right now, then they're looking for another sale. I know this is true because we go back to that situation with databases. A database is something that if you were to ask agents right now, do you have a database? All the hands in the room would go up because they know they're supposed to have one and they don't want to admit it. But one of the questions I ask people all the time when I visit with them, whether I'm interviewing them or we're talking about their business and things like that, I say, how many people are in your database right now? And they'll go, 110, 115. I said, how long have you been in business? 20 years. How many transactions do you sell a year? Just say they only did 20 a year, which is far above the average. So it's a good amount. But say it's 20 times 20 years is 400 names should be in that database. Everybody you know should be in the database. And some of the people that you will actually sell, and they're your past customers. They stay in the database. Selling a person and never calling them back again is insane. It costs 5 to 7 times more to get a new customer than to keep an existing one. And not only are the costs higher securing this new customer, there's more competition from other agents. So the reason sphere of influence works so well is they've already made their mind to use you, hopefully, before they decide they need a realtor. And if you go call on a for sale by owner, which, by the way, this latest report that NAR put out said that less than 5% of the people sold their house on their own. We're at a record high for people using agents. Now, again, back to it. If you did call on a for sale by owner, the problem is so are all the other agents out there calling on them. So you have more competition. It's actually harder. If you've done a good job with these people, and 90% of them, both buyers and sellers, said you did, why would you abandon them? It means thinking about your client, what they're going to need 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. Another CRS instructor, Dick Dillingham, did a favor for my daughter. He had sold my daughter a house, and about 4 years after he sold her the house, he called her on the phone and said, I don't know if you're paying attention, but interest rates have come down and you really should refinance that house. She did refinance the house and it saved her money, but he brought it up for her and she wasn't thinking about it. You've got to position yourself as the go-to advisor for these people. Anything that has to do with home ownership, you want them to come to you. And so we want to just be part of their life, not just part of the deal. Customers for life, we want to be their realtor for life.
For agents who might not know where to begin when it comes to building those client relationships, what advice would you give them on how to get started? You mentioned being consistent on social media. Is there any other advice you would give to agents who are just trying to build that sphere of influence for themselves?
Well, the first thing I would say is, you've got two options. You can create your own content, but it takes a lot of time. Now, you've got to come up with an idea. You've got to decide how to design it and that sort of thing. Now, Canva, which is a relatively inexpensive product, is an easy way to do that, but it does take time to learn how to use it. And there's plenty of YouTube videos, and they have their own training on that and everything else. One of the things I would tell you is good to use, the National Association of Realtors, you can go right to their main website and go to research, and they give you every month 3 or 4 posts that you could add to your social media. And they're talking about things from a national standpoint. Well, that is really good stuff, and that's great to send out. Where the problem comes in is there's all sorts of other people that are creating information. Hello creates it, Realtor.com creates it, and even though Realtor.com sounds like it's part of the National Association of Realtors, it is not. And Rocket Mortgage, and I could list 30 or 40 of these companies that create content that they post on social media and they want you to share it. Here's where the problem comes in. When you share it, it takes them back to their website where they harvest these prospects and then turn around and sell them to the competition, your competition. So you've got somebody that's on your social media looking at your stuff, and all of a sudden they're over there on the competitor's website. So don't use curated content. Use original content. Use content that you're not going to send them somewhere else. You know what is going on in your neighborhood. Now, if you have time to do it, one of the things to do is to not only just talk about the market updates, which tends to be what the vast majority of agents do. Now let's talk about what people post. When I look at a person's Facebook page or X or LinkedIn or whatever they've got, I look to see what types of things they're posting. And there's 2 classifications of posts. There is educational and informational, and then there's product marketing. Realtors are very, very good at doing product marketing because they're trying to get a sale right now. They're advertising or posting about an open house, a new listing, a price reduction, property that just sold. All of these things are product marketing. And if that's all you're putting on social media, it's no wonder you're not getting a lot of engagement on that, because over 90% of the people are not in the market to buy and sell right now. Some people might be moderately interested in it just to keep up with what's going on, okay, but not everybody. So that's why at least 80% of your content should be educational and informational. We call that the product mix. So don't let the product marketing get over 20%. Now, in that 80%, you could even talk about your own personal stuff periodically. Do whatever your passion is because people are interested in your personal life. So, if you like to cook, and if you were to look at my Facebook pages, you would see I post food a lot of time. I like to have dinner parties and do food, and I like bourbon and I do cocktails and I show those types of things and my dogs. And all those things are also part of showing the public who you really are. And so these are some of the things that are important.
Pat, I think that's a great breakdown of what agents should and shouldn't be doing when it comes to their own social media feed and creating that content to drive engagement. Now, looking ahead to 2030 and the years in the future, how do you see an agent's role shifting from salesperson to that long-term advisor that you've been speaking of? And what skills do you think will matter the most for staying relevant?
I remember a saying I heard a long time ago, and it was, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. And so we have to show our care and concern for them. So a genuine attitude of service, putting your customer's interests first above your own. Now that's the definition of a fiduciary, which we have an obligation through our National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics to be that, to always put that in front of them. So I'm going to remind you of that, not that I think you're not doing that, but really paying attention to it. I think knowledge of the local market is imperative. They expect that. And, for instance, we know the difference between a AVM, an automated value model, but the public doesn't know that. And so when they respond to a Zillow or some other thing like that, we've got to tell them that it's a difference when a person goes out there, an experienced agent, and puts their eyeballs on the market and they know what's going on. They put their eyeballs on the house. They can tell the condition that it's in and the other houses that are on the market at that time. I think anytime you have a large amount of competition, you've got to find an area that makes you different from everybody else. Now, this is basic marketing. This, in every business, it's called differentiation. So if you're going to work with first-time buyers, then it's imperative for you to know about all the financing programs that are out there and the financial assistance programs that are out there. But maybe it's things that you also need to know about investments and taxes and technology, anything that can benefit the consumer. Two of the most important skills, and maybe two of the hardest to learn, are negotiation and communication. Very important things. Andrew Carnegie was one of the nation's foremost industrialists, Bethlehem Steel. He made the comment one time that he said, I will pay more for the ability to communicate than I will any other ability. And so we have to be better at communications. And that it goes with face-to-face, email, social media posts, and regular presentations. I personally believe that the online portals are not going to replace a live, breathing agent. The latest profile of buyers and sellers said that 91% of sellers sold with an agent, 88% of buyers bought with an agent, and only 5% were for sale by owners. It's the largest investment that they make. They want somebody that's going to talk to them, hold their hand, figuratively, and they want somebody that's going to advise them and really puts their interests ahead of everything else. And I think even though all these companies that have invested, in some cases, they have market caps of $1 billion or more, some of these companies that are out there right now that have entered into the business in the last 15 to 20 years, they're trying to make this the Costco, or maybe that's not even a fair expression because I love Costco, but they're trying to make it the Amazon real estate, and it's not going to be that way. It's a different commodity altogether.
Pat, you emphasized how essential communication is important across every channel. How does today's longer ownership cycle change the way the agent should approach relationships and database management?
The one thing that I want you to remember is that homeowners are staying in their home a lot longer than they used to. 30 to 40 years ago, it was closer to 7 years they were staying in a house. According to this latest report that's out, they're staying in their homes 11 years, which is an all-time high. If you look at the median age of a first-time buyer, it's 41. That's way over 10 years more than it was. The median age of a repeat buyer is 61 years of age. So what we have to do is build our databases a little bit bigger than they would normally be, because the frequency with which they sell is not as often as it has been in the past. But it's not just doing business with a person again that we're concerned with. If we can make them a raving fan, and that's a big difference than just being a satisfied customer. A raving fan is somebody that becomes an advocate for you. Then what will happen is, if they even hear of somebody that's thinking about buying or selling a house, they are going to interject and say, you've got to call my realtor, and they'll give you the recommendation, and they'll even call you and tell you about it. I really believe that most agents out here are the CEO of their company. Now, I see that on there all the time, and I think they expect it to be chief executive officer, but they're really the chief everything officer. You know, they do everything that they have to do. And there's only 24 hours in a day, and if you fill that with all the important stuff, some of the other stuff isn't going to get done. I'm going to tell you a quick story. My son was just barely a teenager, and I was out on the road speaking, and I had given him a job to do when I left him. And so during the week, I called him and I said, Peter, tell me something. How you doing on the job? He says, no problem, Dad. I said, Peter, are you going to have it finished? He says, yeah, I've got JJ helping me. Well, that was his buddy. I said, are you paying JJ, or is this one of those Huckleberry Finn type things where you're whitewashing a fence and you've conned him into doing it? He says, no, Dad, I'm paying JJ. I'm just not paying him as much as you're paying me. Now, that blew me away, because here is a very young person that understands the concept of delegating. Now, I think any of you would understand that if you spent all your time working with buyers or sellers, your time in front of that customer would be worth $100 to $200 an hour. In some of your cases, more than that. Now, here's the concept. If you're worth that much, why are you doing something that you can pay somebody else $15 to $20 an hour to do? It frees up your time, and you make a profit on their work. You need to consider delegating things. It could be to another person, or it could be to a third-party service. But the last thing I would tell you about is, I just want to reinforce that thing about your database. Your database as an agent is your most valuable asset, and you've really got to take care of it, and you've got to put time into it. And it's not about which product you're using, which companies the database is. It's the actual list of names. And what I would recommend is simply this. Everybody you know is in the list. When you meet somebody, you either send them your phone number so they can send you back their phone number, get their email, take a picture of them. Whenever they go into, I use Outlook. I told you that a minute ago. I take a picture. I find a picture of them on any of their social media profiles. I save it, put it in there so that when the phone rings, I see their picture. It makes it easier for me to communicate with them. I know that I cannot take enough ginkgo biloba to remember everything that I say to people. So when I'm talking to a customer, I make notes about it and I date it. That's something that took me a while to figure out, but I've known it for decades now. You've got to date the note, because these people are going to be around in your life for decades. And so you date the note so you can remember it. You write down and accumulate their birthday, you accumulate their anniversaries, because that will give you the opportunity to touch them one more time. That's not a sales call, and it shows them you care. And then, of course, you need to spend time with them. I think there's 3 categories of the people in your database. Now, if you want to call them A, B's, and C's, or 1, 2s, and 3s, that's fine. But I'm going to tell you that everybody in your database gets your weekly newsletter. Everybody gets your social media posts. Everybody gets your holiday greetings. Anything you can send out digitally, everybody gets. There's virtually no cost in that to you. The people that have purchased at least one house from you, or you're convinced they're going to purchase a house with you or sell a house, I would call that in the top 50% of my list. And then I would call them at least twice a year. And you don't have to talk about real estate, but there's plenty of our RC courses that talk about what you can talk about those. I'm not going to tell you that right now, but use the Ford formula, and that's all I'm going to say. And then the last one is the top 25%. Those are the people that you need to go out and visit with. And you can either meet them for breakfast, meet them for coffee, go to lunch with them. You can drop by. Right now is the time when you can go to Costco and you can buy those great big imported chocolate bars or other things like that. And you can have them in your car, not if it's too hot wherever you are, but it actually drop them off. Just leave them, just ring the doorbell and say, I was in the neighborhood. I wanted to drop this off. No, nothing I wanted to talk about in particular, but that's a drop by. Or you could have an event. A friend of mine, Mike Parker from Northern Kentucky, just this past weekend, on Saturday, he did the Santa pictures for everybody. And then on Tuesday, he did the Pie Day, just he does every year before Thanksgiving. So these are customer appreciation events. So it's not necessarily complicated, but it is hard work to put all these systems into place. And so if you can't do it all yourself, get some help.
Pat, there's been so much great information for our listeners in this podcast. We're coming to the end of our time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think anybody gets in real estate for it to be a temporary job. I think you're really in the business to stay a long time. I'm going to tell you a story real quick about Stuart Wade, who was a very active person in CRS. Stuart lived in Hawaii, and he came to all the national meetings, and he was faithful, and he was a fantastic person. He sold real estate almost up to the day he died, which was at age 105. To swim in the ocean every single day until he was about 101. An amazing, amazing person. He was interviewed by NBC. They did a special one time on centenarians who are still working. So he was one of the three people that they interviewed, and they asked him when he got into real estate. And he said, I didn't get into real estate until I was almost 80. And they said, wow. And he said, yeah, but the interesting thing about it is I've made more in real estate since I was 80 than the 80 years before. And the way he did it was practicing the principles that I've talked about today. He was an amazing individual. So real estate is not something that they can retire you on. You can work this as long as you want to work in real estate. And my answer to anybody that says, when are you going to retire? The answer is, as long as I'm still having fun, I'm going to continue doing it.
That's a great story to wrap up this episode where we've talked so much about longevity in real estate. Thank you so much, Pat, for being with us. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for listening to Real Estate Real Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, crs.com/realtalk, to your friends and colleagues. Please leave us a positive review wherever you listen to our podcast, and be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous episodes. This has been a Residential Real Estate Council production. Join us next time for another edition of Real Estate Real Talk.